Confined within the walls of a South African jail, the young lawyer from India found no reason to complain.
Some say that jail is a palace. Others look upon it as a beautiful garden. Some others hold that through the jail gates we shall pass from our present bondage to freedom.
The year was 1907. The young lawyer from India was Mohandas Gandhi. Gandhi led his fellow Indians in a non-violent struggle against racial oppression for 8 years. They marched into forbidden territory. They burned their registration papers. They expected to be arrested, and they were not disappointed. Gandhi said, "Non-violent refusal to cooperate with injustice is the way to defeat it." He gave his non-violent weapon a name, Satyagraha, holding to truth. In every decade and on every continent, underdogs have taken up Gandhi's strategies to fight for their rights and freedom.
Non-violence means fighting back, but you're fighting back with other weapons.
The power that Gandhi discovered changed the 20th century. Spring weather comes early in 1940, adding to the illusion that tranquil Denmark can remain untouched by the war that is spreading across Europe. Danish government has proclaimed neutrality and reduced its armed forces by half. Denmark intends to remain at peace. On the morning of April 9th, everything changes. Attacking by air, land, and sea, the German war machine meets token opposition in the south, but then Denmark orders its troops to lay down their arms.
Vi kunne slet ikke forestille os, at det var noget med krig eller besættelse eller noget, så man tænkte om det, og vi fløj jo op af scenen og kiggede og sagde, det, de er meget nærgående, sagde vi eller noget, ikke? Og de tyskere, de skal altid være så larmende og sådan noget, men så pludselig så gik det op for os, at det var noget forfærdeligt jo, ikke?
The invaders capture the headquarters of the Danish Army General Staff without firing a shot. Disbelieving Danes wander the streets, watching helplessly. German leaflets and posters say, "We come not as enemies but as friends," and promise that Denmark will remain under Danish law and government. It's hard to believe. Hitler has occupied an entire country in under 6 hours. Late that afternoon, Danish Prime Minister Thorvald Snorning asks the Danish Parliament to officially accept the terms of the German occupation.
Bare følte, at den politik, han førte, var den rigtige. Den var der mest skånsom over for befolkningen. Havde vi den 9. april sat ind med det militær, den smule militær, vi havde var København utvivlsomt blevet bombet, og tusinder af mennesker.
Rather than suffer certain defeat, Danish political leaders choose not to fight. Their goal is survival. They will attempt to hold the Germans to their promises, to respect Danish neutrality. They will negotiate the terms of occupation under protest, hoping to turn the charade of friendly relations to Denmark's advantage.
The king was in place, the parliament was legislating, the police was in charge of the law and order, the Danish courts were functioning, and the Jewish community was functioning.
At the start, German troops are well-mannered and respectful. But their very presence is a provocation. Danes wonder, now that we have capitulated, what next? They have not prepared for a German occupation. They have no Gandhi. They have no resistance organization.
In most homes, the attitude was that we have to accept this and try to make it work, but for goodness sake, don't try to have anything to do with them. They never speak to a German soldier, and be careful what you do.
Danish cabinet ministers adopt a policy of resistance disguised as collaboration. Danes will cooperate with the Germans, but only as a tactic to preserve self-rule. German demands will be negotiated by diplomats, delayed by bureaucrats, and quietly obstructed when possible. For many Danes, it's not enough.
Denmark was humiliated, and the whole population actually suddenly felt that they had lost something of their dignity, something of their country's dignity. What were you to do? What could you do in this situation? You couldn't go out fighting. The fight was not there. So they gathered in the park of the city and sing national anthems.
Every week, the songfests grow, signaling the birth of Danish solidarity against a common enemy. And Danes take new pride in their king, who rides alone every morning as always.
Folket var jo, hvad skal jeg sige, meget kongebevidste på den tid. Det var sådan ligesom en måde også at demonstrere over for tyskerne, at vi skulle ikke have noget diktatur.
Germans ignore exhibitions of national pride, as long as they do not interfere with German objectives. To use Denmark's farms to feed the German army, to use Danish factories and shipyards to supply war material. Relations with Germany are handled by Danish Foreign Minister Erik Scavenius, a man many believe is pro-German.
When people argued with him and said, well, in the long run, we are losing our respect all over the country, he said, well, yes, that's correct, but we might keep our respect and be dead, all of us. He said, how many corpses do you want in order to save your honor?
Scavenius wants the Germans to think they're getting what they want, to keep pressure off Denmark. In November 1941, he goes to Berlin to sign a treaty justifying the German invasion of the Soviet Union. When his photograph with Hitler is published in Denmark, outraged students take to the streets. After 5 days, Danish police restore order, but public support for the Scavenius policies is severely damaged. Underground resistance leaders condemn even tactical collaboration as treason. Their primary weapon is information. The illegal press reaches 2.5 million, Denmark's entire adult population. Uncensored news of the war, gathered from the BBC and other sources, fuels Danish hopes. And the illegal press also encourages active resistance of all kinds. Small-scale attacks, arson, the stealing of weapons from German soldiers, pouring sugar into gas tanks are the work of untrained high school students. They say, if the adults won't do something, we will. German authorities order local police to crack down, but patriotic young Danes are determined.
Så var jeg meget vred på det tidspunkt. Det var mange unge mennesker vred over, at vi ikke havde gjort større modstand, end vi havde. At man senere hen godt ved, at det var en meget håbløs situation. Det ændrer ikke, at jeg stadigvæk synes, at det var for dårligt, at vi så dårligt passede på vores land.
In November, SS General Werner Best takes charge in Denmark. Hitler tells him to rule with an iron hand. Best pressures Erik Scavenius, the new prime minister, but most Danes have turned against the Scavenius policies. On BBC broadcast from London, a Danish political exile, John Christmas Møller, now speaks defiantly against the prime minister and calls for active resistance.
Og forstå, at det simpelthen ikke kan være andet, end at her hersker et ubarmhjertigt stålkoldt. Ingen af mine lyttere har kunnet være i tvivl af, at jeg meget længe har set, at således og ikke anderledes var det.
Spring 1943. The German occupation is 3 years old. A facade of cooperation continues, but popular loyalty is shifting to the resistance movement. By day, the government campaigns against sabotage. By night, explosions rock the factories and rail lines, cutting German supply lines at their source. By summer of 1943, reports of German defeats in Russia, North Africa and southern Europe encouraged the Danes to more vigorous resistance.
There were strikes in the provincial towns, not only strikes in the factories, but the whole cities where administration, stores, everything was closed.
Sabotage attacks more than double in only 1 month. But those Danes who are unable to carry out sabotage find other ways to resist, even defying their own government.
For det første så havde vi jo nedsat arbejde, altså sænkt tempoet. Vi nåede aldrig nogensinde, heller ikke senere, på det tempo, vi havde inden krigen. For eksempel, vi fik jo nogle nybygninger, og de fik aldrig et skib færdigt. De blev saboteret hver gang, så de til sidst må slæve dem ned til Tyskland og lave dem færdige.
The Danish authority did whatever they could to stop the strikes. And they found out that this was impossible. They could not. They had lost the authority. The authority of leading these masses lay with some local, unauthorized, not elected leaders and with the illegal press.
A government in name only. Danish political leaders have one last act to perform. On the morning of August 28, 1943, they receive an ultimatum from the German occupiers. Strikes must be banned, curfews imposed, saboteurs executed. Denmark must answer by 4 p.m. Parliament debates the demands for 6 hours.
Now, these were demands they could not say yes to. And then they told the Germans that they could not accept this ultimatum.
Foreign Minister Scavenius and his cabinet resign. Parliament goes home. Denmark is no longer under Danish authority. Direct German rule, postponed for 3 years by the Scavenius policy of cooperation, descends on Denmark. The Wehrmacht occupies key facilities. Gatherings of 5 or more persons are banned. The new rules are brutally enforced.
Now we knew where we were, two opposite parties, and cooperation had become impossible, so we would have to go our different ways, trying to make things work, of course, but there was no doubt now that they were the enemy and we were the occupied country.
Just weeks later, they face their first crisis, when Adolf Hitler orders his commanders to impose Germany's racial laws in Denmark.
Having survived from the outbreak of the war, there was, of course, kind of, belief that things would be all right. But the shield which had protected us against the fate of Jews in the rest of Europe, the shield disappeared, and we were standing undefended against the Germans.
The German Gestapo has obtained a list of names and addresses for the 7,000 Danish Jews. But plans for the roundup have been leaked. The Jews are warned. Thousands of Danes step forward to save them.
I remember the shock I got when the day I went to school and suddenly the headmaster knocked on the door and called me and another Jewish boy out of the class and told us, you better hurry up because your parents are waiting for you. You have to get out of your flat. The Germans are coming tonight.
The roundup begins on the night of October 1st. But the Jews have been hidden in attics and cellars, in the churches and homes of thousands of Danes who have spontaneously taken them in.
Vi blev sendt for eksempel en gang til Fyn, til Odense, for efter aftale at hente nogle jøder, der kom med tog fra Jylland, og få dem hjulpet så, hvad skal man kalde det, tilfældigt og let igennem den tyske kontrol på Storebælt. Færgerne, der skulle over der, var stærkt bevogtede af tyskerne, og det vil sige, at vi skulle prøve på at agere et eller andet fællesskab med disse mennesker.
Their refuge will be Sweden, only a few miles across waters patrolled by the German Navy. They hide in forests and wait. Herbert Pundik and his family are picked up by one of the many fishermen who risk the voyage and save all but a few hundred of Denmark's Jews.
I looked back towards the coast and I saw something which I'll never forget in my whole life. I'm not a religious person myself, but still I'm still moved when I think about it. On this sandy beach I saw the 3 persons, our, so to say, savior, his wife and the wife of the fisherman, kneeling on the beach with folded lifting hands towards heaven, praying for our safe passage.
The rescue of the Jews has united and inspired Danes, just as they are coming to view the resistance movement as their de facto government. The Freedom Council publishes a first clandestine leaflet in November 1943. A program of resistance aimed at denying Germany the benefits of occupation. With explosives and equipment airdropped by British forces, the underground avoids human targets, concentrating on war-related industry. Their first targets are Danish industries and transport that supply the German army. Each success brings harsher and deadlier reprisals by the Nazis, who bomb theaters, clubs, and Copenhagen's renowned Tivoli Gardens. In a desperate move to stop the explosions, the German governor puts the population of Copenhagen under curfew in June 1944. Workers at the Burmeister and Wain shipyard retaliate with an ingenious but risky scheme.
Ja, vi har håbet, altså, vi vil afskaffe den spærretid, ikke? Vi vil have lov at have vores frihed. Vi skulle ikke spærres ind om aftenen. Da klokken var 12, så gik vi over ved porten og sparkede på døren og sagde, at vi ville hjem. Vi skulle ud og vende vores koloni.
1,200 shipyard workers go home early. They insist it's not a strike. They must tend their gardens in the afternoon because the curfew stops them from gardening in the evening. The Go Home Early movement spreads fast. Thousands of workers in other factories walk off their jobs, but few go to their gardens. Congregating in the streets, they demonstrate, build bonfires, and taunt German patrols. 6 Danes are killed on the first day.
Der blev bygget barrikader i gaderne. Der blev sat ild til alt muligt på gaderne. Og folk gik, altså alt arbejde ophørte, folk ville ikke gå på arbejde. Og alle de ting, dem skal vi jo ikke beskrive nu her i de detaljerne dag for dag. Men der kom en stemning blandt folk, der virkelig tydede på, at danskerne nu godt forstod, at man måtte kæmpe mod tyskerne. Det var nok en af de største begivenheder, folkestrejken.
Nazi governor Werner Best tightens the vice daily. Troops are ordered to shoot at groups of 5 or more. Then he cuts off electricity, gas and water. Danes respond by cooking on fires and dipping water from a nearby lake. Best tries to blockade the city, to cut contact with the outside world. The population follows instructions from resistance leaders. Until the curfew ends and shootings stop, stay on strike, says the Freedom Council.
Jamen, det så jeg så op til det. Det var landets lovlige, dem vi retter os efter. Vi strækker til i morgen kl. 12. Og det var meget, hvad skal jeg sige, mærkbart at se, at folk rettede sig efter det. Ligesom på slag 12, så gik det hele i gang. Og det havde tyskerne meget respekt for.
Best is desperate to resume production, but his military options are limited as troops have been taken out of Denmark to fight the losing war. Most of all, he knows that Danish workers are worth more alive than dead. On the 9th day, Best concedes. He will end the curfew and withdraw his troops if the strikers go back to work. The Freedom Council issues a victory bulletin which ends the walkout. It declares strikes are their most effective weapon. Unwittingly, the Danes have adopted Gandhi's favorite tactic by simply withdrawing their obedience. Recognizing the power of non-cooperation, the Council shifts its emphasis from encouraging sabotage to coordinating strikes. In the next month, they call for a series of symbolic 2-minute stoppages. Denmark suffers through one last brutal winter, with shortages in fuel, water and food. And then it was spring.
As was normal in those days, we gathered round the wireless to hear the message from BBC, and then all of a sudden the transmission was interrupted, and then came this wonderful message that the Germans had given up.
A Danish historian concluded, Denmark had not won the war, but neither had it been defeated or destroyed. Most Danes had not been brutalized, by the Germans or by each other. Non-violent resistance saved the country and contributed more to the Allied victory than Danish arms ever could have.
Den følelse, man fik i kroppen, det var jo en blanding af fryd og isnen. Man havde det helt underligt, og man kneb en tåre, og jeg husker, at jeg udbrød helt umiddelbart. Så overlevede vi. Det var måske en af de allerførste ting, jeg overhovedet sagde.
Po pierwsze była atmosfera strajkowa. Przed godziną 6 rozpoczęliśmy rozdawanie ulotek. I w każdej chwili mogłem zostać zatrzymany, aresztowany. Więc oczywiście rozdawałem z obawą.
Workers at the Lenin shipyard in Gdansk are angry enough to strike. Angry at recent price increases and the firing of a popular co-worker. But only a few realize their strike will pit them against the full force of the communist government in Poland.
I kiedy ludzie zaczęli krzyczeć, że otwierać bramę, idziemy na miasto, idziemy pod KW, pod budynek partii komunistycznej, wtedy wiedzieliśmy, że trzeba zaintonować hymn polski, że to ludzi uspokoi. Nie popełniły błędu z 70 roku, kiedy wyszliśmy na ulicę i czołgi nas rozjechały, że zostaniemy w zakładzie.
Every worker in Poland knows the story of December 1970. Strikers left the shipyard and marched on Communist Party headquarters. 6 were killed and 300 injured. They learned the futility of taking on armed troops in the street. One of them was a 27-year-old shipyard electrician named Lech Wałęsa. He was fired for union activism in 1976. But now, in 1980, he has returned to help organize the strike.
Ja przez te 10 lat, od 70 roku, gdzie byłem też przywódcą w tej samej stoczni, zastanawiałem się nad tym, gdzie były błędy i jak gdyby mi los dał jeszcze raz stanąć na czele, jak poprowadzić tą walkę. I dlatego...
This time, Wałęsa and other strike leaders have planned carefully. Wałęsa is known and liked by many at the shipyard. He announces, "We will occupy the shipyard. I'll be the last to leave." Their strike will be strictly non-violent. The government will have no excuse to begin shooting. The strike committee commandeers a cafeteria in Wałęsa's old department. Their first step is to make sure news of the strike is not suppressed by the regime. Alina Piankowska, a shipyard nurse, telephones Jacek Koron at the Workers' Defense Committee in Warsaw, who will pass the news to Radio Free Europe, and the BBC.
Dzięki temu świat mógł o nas usłyszeć, nie tylko świat, mogły usłyszeć także rodziny stoczniowców gdańskich, prawda? Dowiedziały się, dlaczego mężowie, ojcowie nie wrócili o zwykłej porze do domów. I ten telefon jakby spowodował także organizowanie się ludzi w mieście Gdańsku.
On Friday morning, the strike has widened. Public transportation has stopped, the port is closed, and 22 factories are on strike, 50,000 workers in all. Government has cut phone lines to the rest of Poland for fear the strikes will spread. But it's too late. All over Poland, people know about the Gdansk strike. In the cafeteria, the strike committee hammers out a list of demands. They prepare leaflets for the striking workers. At the top of the list is the right to free and independent unions and the right to strike. Unprecedented rights that Poland's communist regime will surely resist. On Saturday, the shipyard director has received orders from his Communist Party superiors and is ready to begin negotiating. The shipyard offers generous wage increases and better working conditions, everything but independent unions. But when the vote is taken, management has packed the committee with party officials. The terms are accepted and workers begin going home. As thousands head for the gate, Anna Valentinovic, recently fired but now reinstated by the strike agreement, reminds them that their settlement has abandoned other workers who have joined the strike.
A co z tymi, którzy nas poparli? Przecież to 40 chyba zakładów było. Co z tymi ludźmi? Ja czułam się zawstydzona i bezradna. Co mamy zrobić?
Alina Pienkowska, the nurse, runs to the main gate and tries to stop the workers. A small crowd gathers to listen as she pleads with them to stay.
Naprawdę wolnych związków zawodowych chcemy, żebyśmy sami mogli wpływać na dyrekcję. To powinniśmy robić solidarnie, to co ta druga brama, czyli strajk kontynuować.
Thousands have gone home, but a few hundred are persuaded by Alina's argument. They will stay the night to keep the strike alive. During that night, they take a fateful decision to form an inter-factory strike committee to represent all workers in all of Poland. This committee will magnify their force 1,000 times and create a base of popular power never before seen in communist Poland. On Sunday morning, workers improvise a Catholic mass inside the main gate. Thousands of townspeople gather outside. The gate is decorated with flowers, messages of support, and a photograph of the Pope, who is Polish. It's an unexpected show of support for the strikers.
Ja się w ogóle tego nie spodziewałam. Takiej reakcji gdańszczan. Już nabrałam dużo odwagi i dużo energii do działania, bo wiedziałam, że chyba jednak coś się nam uda osiągnąć. Tego się po prostu nie spodziewaliśmy.
Głośniki, 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 głośniki.
The Inter-Factory Strike Committee has published 21 demands, a document that has galvanized workers in other cities. One of them is a 27-year-old electrician at a tractor factory near Warsaw, Zbigniew Bujak.
I tu nagle
dowiedzieliśmy się o strajku w Gdańsku, jak przeczytaliśmy te 21 postulatów, jest takie powiedzenie w Polsce, że poczuliśmy się, jakbyśmy Pana Boga chwycili za rękę czy za nogę. I to było takie właśnie wrażenie, że mamy w ręku narzędzie, które, jeśli nie zrobimy błędu, to ono musi wydać z siebie jakieś wspaniałe owoce.
In Gdansk, the strikers who spent the weekend inside the shipyard have been rewarded. 15,000 workers now return and rejoin the strike. The Inter-Factory Strike Committee waits for a response to the 21 demands. While they wait, more factories join the strike. They steadily gain leverage over a system that has never permitted the existence of a power separate from the Communist Party. Everywhere, workers follow the example set in Gdansk, reducing risk by staying inside their workplaces.
Nie wychodzimy za bramę, bo tam władza ma bardzo łatwą już drogę do prowokacji, zwykłej prowokacji, później użycia właśnie policji i wojska. Więc tego nie chcieliśmy. Wiedzieliśmy o działalności na przykład Gandhiego czy Martina Luthera Kinga i po prostu wiedzieliśmy, że ci ludzie, budując teorię walki bez przemocy, wygrali. Najzwyczajniej w świecie wygrali, że to jest siła.
The second week begins. Strikers are publishing a daily bulletin called Solidarity and making preparations for a long struggle.
Można powiedzieć, że na terenie stoczni w tym samym czasie był jakby drugi rząd w Polsce. Myśmy nawet to tak trochę humorystycznie ponazywali, że był minister łączności, prawda? Był minister pracy i płacy, czyli zbierał pieniądze, i był minister finansów, który trzymał kasę, którą zbieraliśmy od różnych zakładów pracy, które tutaj przyjeżdżały. Za służbę bezpieczeństwa stoczniową był minister bezpieczeństwa, którą zajmował się z wszystkimi strażami wewnątrzstoczniowymi, ochronę murów, płotów i tak dalej. I jeśli chodzi o żywność, to wszystko chodziło jak w szwajcarskim zegarku.
Their patience has given them strength. By the 9th day, the Inter-Factory Strike Committee speaks for nearly 500,000 workers in 370 factories in every industry and region of Poland. Government negotiators arrive at the shipyard. The long stalemate appears to be over. Jerzy Kolodziejski, provincial governor of Gdansk, was on the negotiating team.
Jedni klaskali, byli zadowoleni, że wreszcie władza, wojewoda wchodzi do stoczni, zapoczątkuje rozmowy, ale drudzy przeklinali, gwizdali, wyzywali. I ja nie miałem wątpliwości, że idę na spalenie.
Workers demand that all discussions be broadcast over shipyard loudspeakers. Polish news media must be allowed to cover the strike and talks. The government has come to the bargaining table after 10 days of stalling.
Wszystko spaliło na panewce. Okazało się, że te 10 dni strajkujący wykorzystali na umocnienie organizacyjne międzyzakładowego komitetu, utrwalili przekonanie, że bez rozmów z tym komitetem nie nastąpi rozwiązanie konfliktu.
Mieczysław Jagielski, Poland's first deputy prime minister, faces Lech Wałęsa, a 37-year-old electrician. Jagielski is accustomed to microphones and cameras. Wałęsa describes himself as a simple worker, following his heart.
Społeczeństwo polskie na przykładzie społeczeństwa Wybrzeża dało dowody.
The regime has called the strikers traitors. Now the deputy prime minister has been sent to negotiate with them. The strike committee is cautious, knowing that if they push too hard, the game will be lost, and that Soviet military intervention is a real possibility. Negotiators for the workers are in no hurry. Having seized the initiative, they go word by word over the language dealing with independent unions, brushing aside the government's eagerness to move on to other issues.
Punkt po punkcie, po parę godzin każdy następny redagowali. Albo, że tak powiem, przyjmujemy to, co powiedziałem i przystępujemy do realizacji.
Panie premierze, naprawdę to już nie jest dużo pracy w tych najważniejszych punktach. Te inne polecą dość szybko, dlatego też proponuję, tyle czekaliśmy, sobota jest, niedziela jeszcze przepracujemy, zrobimy, będziemy mieli na piśmie, pan premier przyjedzie.
Taktyka strajkujących była taka. Musimy rozstrzygnąć zgodę na wolne związki zawodowe, a wszystko inne to poleci. Wałęsa mówi, panie premierze, nie rozmawiajmy na te tematy, to są szczegóły. Musimy mieć wolne związki zawodowe.
Coś nie dogadać się w czymś. My chcemy, jeśli to wszystko dobrze pójdzie...
During nearly 2 weeks of talks, Wałęsa reports regularly to the rank and file. He seeks consensus with an openness unheard of in Poland's official unions. Worker solidarity is not lost on their adversaries.
Żaden strajk nie był w atmosferze takiej stanowczości, takiej woli zwycięstwa, takiej konsolidacji, że my z tej sali musimy wyjść jako zwycięzcy. Takie było przekonanie nie tylko MKS-u, ale tych robotników, wszystkich otaczających nas i tych dziesiątków, tysięcy ludzi wokół stoczni. Więc to wszystko oddziaływało w sposób określony. Zmiękczało nas, szczerze mówiąc, zmiękczało.
Idle factories create pressures that benefit the strikers. In Gdansk, valuable machinery and unfinished ships are being held hostage. Increasingly desperate to resume production, the regime gradually accepts an accommodation. On Sunday, August 31st, an agreement is ready to sign. They have won pay raises, a 5-day work week, relaxed press censorship, free trade unions, and the right to strike.
Ja powiedziałem pierwszego dnia, że zwyciężymy i zwyciężyliśmy. Taka jest krótka prawda.
Jednocześnie jakby widząc, jak podpisywane jest to porozumienie, od razu jakby zdaliśmy sobie sprawę z tego, że to jest taki pierwszy etap i teraz dopiero rozpoczyna się dla nas prawdziwy wyścig z czasem i prawdziwa taka rywalizacja również, nie wiem, taktyczna, intelektualna z drugą stroną, z władzą. Bo było dla nas oczywiste, że podpisują do porozumienia, ale będą go chcieli natychmiast złamać, zdławić.
The race against time begins as Wałęsa and Walentinowicz tour the country to celebrate their success, recruit new members, and create hundreds of affiliated local unions. In 4 months, Solidarity membership grows to 10 million. Explicitly concerned with the welfare of Polish working people, Solidarity can't avoid an obvious reality. Its very existence challenges the supremacy of the Communist Party.
Ja miałem takie wrażenie, że od początku druga strona się szykuje do rozbicia nas, gotowa rozbić na przykład, nie wiem, 100 organizacji, to tych organizacji już nie jest 100, tylko 1000. Jak się przygotowali do rozbicia tego 1000, to już tych organizacji nie było 1000, tylko 10 000. A członków już nie było 100 000, tylko 1 000 000, a później 10 milionów.
They must grow quickly, becoming big enough that when the inevitable backlash comes, solidarity will be too powerful to destroy. Union activists are harassed, their newspapers censored, offices raided. Workers are ordered to work 2 Saturdays a month, an open breach of the agreement. Solidarity fights back.
Tak. Wydaje mi się, że w poniedziałek postawię cały kraj na nogi. Zrobię strajk. Pan tak przekaże to. Ja mam dość żartów i podjazdów. Panie wojewu, pan dobrze wie. Więc pan przekaże rządowi, że w poniedziałek prawdopodobnie dam rozkaz do strajku generalnego. Dziękuję. Trochę demokracji, trochę wolności osobistej. Przez każdych ludzi. O, nie dam rady. Nie tak bardzo trudno. Niekulturalnie tego, ale nie mogę.
A year after it was founded, the union re-elects Wałęsa as president.
Lech Wałęsa.
But Solidarity's open democratic structure makes it vulnerable to its own extremists and to infiltrators.
No ale było paru takich agentów, którzy, możemy posłuchać taśm dzisiaj jeszcze nawet, którzy tutaj podkręcali atmosferę, żeby jednak wezwać do tego strajku generalnego, żeby w tej Warszawie zrobić tą demonstrację tam na 100-200 tysięcy, no i wtedy bicie się po szczękach. I myślę, że innej reakcji władzy nie było. Albo oddać władzę, demokratyczne wybory, albo czołgi, a nas do więzienia.
On the night of December 12, 1981, communist authorities raid a conference of Solidarity's national leaders. The entire presidium is arrested in its hotel. In the next 2 days, Solidarity activists are rounded up by the thousands. Martial law is declared on December 13th.
Ja w momencie internowania, uderzenia w nas, powiedziałem dość słynne zdania, że otóż właśnie w tym momencie jesteście przegrani. My zwyciężamy, a wy sobie wbiliście ostatnie trumny do waszej komunistycznej trumny.
Martial law is an admission that the regime has lost the people's consent. Relying solely on the power to prohibit, the regime has lost all ability to persuade. Though the union is banned, popular support for it is undiminished. Solidarity becomes a non-violent resistance movement, infused with a sense of Polish patriotism. Stripped of a central leadership, Solidarity lives on in thousands of small organizations, too many to crush. An underground press unifies them as they both resist and ignore state power.
Wiedzą, że to jest metoda walki moja, że ja nie boję się was, zamknijcie mnie, możecie mnie zabić, ale nie pokonać. Walka będzie się toczyć. Walka jest zwycięska. Trochę to potrwa, trochę to będzie kosztowało, ale na pewno zwyciężymy.
For 7 years, repression creates the appearance of stability. But below the surface, the foundation is rotting. In summer 1988, it collapses as price increases, food lines, and rationing paralyze the country. A new wave of strikes is beyond the government's ability to control. The regime offers to re-legalize Solidarity if Lech Wałęsa will negotiate an end to the strikes. Within 3 days, the country is back at work. Solidarity has proven itself a capable and responsible force. In February 1989, Solidarity, the government, the party and the church begin roundtable talks on Poland's future. After 2 months of negotiations, they agree on free unions, a free press and parliamentary elections. In a 2-month campaign, Solidarity candidates are popular, but no one expects them to dislodge the Communist Party. On June 4th, 1989, Poland votes in the first open democratic elections in more than 60 years. That night, in the square outside Lech Wałęsa's apartment, the victory is celebrated. Solidarity has defeated the Communist Party by a margin of 10-1.
Natomiast ja sobie myślałem tak, że jeśli tylko mi da uchylić drzwi do wolności, a ja wstawię swój but robotniczy, to już nie zamkniecie tych drzwi.
Spring 1983. For nearly 10 years, General Augusto Pinochet has ruled Chile unchallenged.
Faltaba que alguien se atreviera a decirle al dictador que era dictador y decir dictadura a la dictadura y de enfrentarla en su propio terreno. No es que no era el terreno de las armas, sino el terreno del enfrentamiento, de atreverse a decirles a ellos que lo que había en Chile estaba mal y eso había que cambiarlo.
Pinochet came to power in a 1973 coup that left the elected socialist president, Salvador Allende, dead.
En los primeros meses del golpe militar, el número de detenidos en las cárceles era superior a las 40.000 personas. Los cálculos indican de que a lo menos en el orden de unas 3.000 personas fueron asesinadas, ejecutadas o sus cuerpos desaparecieron para siempre.
Ruthlessly eliminating any challenge to his authority, Pinochet's rule casts fear into every corner of Chilean life.
It was a very permeating paranoia, and it was with everyone. Everybody had experienced some sort of repression in their family, and they were very cautious. My husband and I would go to a social gathering, and he wouldn't introduce me to anyone. And I said, well, why won't you introduce me to people? And he said, oh, we don't do that now. It's too dangerous. You don't really want to know people's names.
Fear, terror. If you have people afraid, you can control them. And Pinochet, if something he will leave in history, he's the man of terror.
Executions, disappearances, and prisons keep the dictatorship in power for 10 years. By 1983, a severe economic crisis has pushed unemployment to 30%. As Chileans feel they have nothing left to lose, open opposition to the regime becomes thinkable for the first time. The first signs of opposition appear at the heart of Chile's economy, in the copper mines of the Andes Mountains. Miners are amongst Chile's best paid workers in the country's largest and most lucrative export industry. Their leader is 29-year-old Rodolfo Seguel, a payroll clerk at Chile's largest copper mine, recently elected president of the National Labor Congress. Seguel wants his members to take the first step, a nationwide strike.
10 años y nadie había salido a la calle. Había que conocer qué reacción tenía el país o si el país se atrevía. Nuestra intención era abrir los ojos y decir que era posible hacer algo. Yo creo que sí. Nuestra intención final fue esa.
A week before the strike is to begin, Pinochet's troops surround the copper mines. Seguel knows that there will be bloodshed if the strike goes forward. They change their plans. Instead of a strike, they proclaim a national day of protest. With only a few days to prepare, they must mobilize not just union members, but the whole population.
Y yo recuerdo que esa mañana me levanté y uno al comienzo no sabía si alguien estaba andando lento en su automóvil o si caminaba lento en la vereda porque estaba paseando o si era alguien que estaba protestando. Hasta que finalmente, al mediodía, era tan obvio, fue tan obvio que todo andaba lento. Fue tan evidente que la ciudad se empezó a cerrar.
As darkness falls, no one knows whether the final overt act of protest will succeed. At exactly 8 p.m. it begins, tentatively at first.
And the next day, there was a sense of sort of, what did you do last night? Did you see it? Oh yes, I was out banging my pots and pans with my neighbors. And so there was a real sense of complicity all of a sudden in a society where each human being had literally become a complete island.
Y el día siguiente que termina la protesta, en la primera reunión nosotros acordamos hacer una protesta todos los meses. Y eso lo hicimos durante 9, 10 meses, todos los meses una protesta, todos los meses. Y fue el caos para la dictadura militar, porque nosotros no hacíamos protestas con armas. Si nos golpeaban, nos golpeaban. La gente misma me dio la fuerza para seguir trabajando.
A mood approaching euphoria grows as the protests grow every month. People start to believe that mass demonstrations alone will bring down the dictatorship. Mainstream opposition protests are strictly non-violent. Brutal police repression of the monthly demonstrations seems intended to intimidate, to stop the movement, but it has no effect. In early August, one day before the fourth protest is scheduled, Pinochet installs a new interior minister, Sergio Harpa. Harpa is instructed to begin a dialogue with the opposition. In a contradictory gesture on the same day, Pinochet deploys thousands of troops in the streets of the capital, an ominous prelude to the next day's demonstrations. Security forces break up the August protest with unprecedented force. A police statement admits that 17 civilians have been killed. The actual number is much higher.
Que fue muy violenta. Y ahí nos dimos cuenta nosotros que no podíamos seguir ese camino porque la violencia era muy fuerte. Pinochet tuvo 16.000 soldados en las calles de Santiago. Murieron más de 80 personas. Y la población empezó a sublevarse.
Shocked by the bloodshed, the new cardinal of Chile's Catholic Church offers to host the dialogue that Pinochet has promised.
En la primera reunión, Gabriel Valdés me dijo que me tenía que entregar un documento. Y le dije, yo no le recibo ese documento porque es un acuerdo que tomaron ustedes en la mañana de hoy exigiendo la renuncia del presidente de la República. Y porque no le reconocen legitimidad a su mandato. Y si el presidente de la República no es legítimo en su mandato, yo no tengo nada que hacer aquí porque yo lo estoy representando a él. Así que hasta aquí llega la reunión.
Buenos días.
As Pinochet celebrates his birthday in November, he has stopped Sergio Harper's meetings with the opposition. Harper's small concessions, limited political activity, the return of exiles, an end to book censorship were too much for the general. The dialogue is over.
No hubo ningún resultado. Fue una cosa muy frustrante. No cambió para nada el régimen. E incluso el propio Harpa después quedó convertido en un personaje político de ninguna importancia, diría. De hecho, el control del gobierno pasó a manos mucho más duras.
Opposition groups have been naive to think that Pinochet would negotiate an end to his own power. Protesters have not loosened the dictator's grip, but they have shown Pinochet they cannot be crushed by force, and they have opened up political space they will use to organize against him.
¡Viva Chile!
In late November 1985, 500,000 attend the largest political rally in Chilean history. Gabriel Valdés speaks for 11 opposition parties and the Catholic Church. The National Accord, formed to lead a non-violent transition to democracy. Valdés warns, if we don't support the National Accord, we are heading towards civil war. In Chile's poor neighborhoods, the poblaciones, a low-intensity war has already begun. Hard times have fallen hardest here, making fertile ground for Chile's Marxist and Communist parties. Not many have personally taken up arms, but the ideology of violent revolution is accepted. The regime sees the poblaciones as enemy territory. Young men in the poblaciones are rounded up, interrogated in stadiums and fields, and hauled off to prison without trial. Hundreds are never seen again. Pinochet's human rights abuses have drawn the normally conservative Catholic Church into the conflict. Though the clergy takes no political position, the Church protests against the torture, killings, and disappearances, and preaches non-violent methods.
If you use violence, then you have to have the force to defend yourself. Whatever you impose through violence, you have to defend through violence. That's why we think that violence is the strength of the weak, because they don't have arguments. They don't have moral authority. So whatever you achieve through violence, you have to defend through violence.
Monthly protests turn violent as the radicals confront police, handing Pinochet the excuse he needs to come down on all opposition. Mainstream factions are harshly criticized for their non-violent methods.
In those conditions, when you are repressed by violence, of course there are people that think that the only way to face violence is through violence. But that was, in our understanding, absolutely out of any possibility of succeeding.
In late summer of 1986, the prospect of full-scale civil war becomes real. Chilean intelligence uncovers a cache of arms in the northern desert and traces them to a guerrilla group affiliated with the Chilean Communist Party. Markings show the weapons have come from Cuba. Pinochet says it's proof that his opponents are preparing a revolution. A few weeks later, heavily armed guerrillas attacked General Pinochet's motorcade on a remote mountain road. State news media report that 5 presidential guards have died, but do not mention Pinochet. Four hours later, the dictator appears on television to describe the attack. He appears unfazed by his narrow escape and returns to the presidential palace with his customary swagger. The episode reinforces his image of invincibility.
It really polarized, I think, between, you know, are we going to go for a really serious attempt at armed struggle, the way we've seen in Central America, with a huge toll on human lives and suffering that was part of that? Or are we going to try to find some other way, which was very nebulous, and so this search began to find some way that could provide some kind of an exit from this impasse.
Pinochet's own constitution calls for a plebiscite in 1988, giving Chileans the right to vote yes or no to another 8 years of military government. Isolated and overconfident, Pinochet always assumed he would win. But after 5 years of organizing, the non-violent opposition sees an opportunity.
For the first time, we knew that if Pinochet was going to remain in power, there's going to be a plebiscite, and you have to say yes or no. Therefore, we say, look, if we prepare ourselves, we can defeat Pinochet saying no.
And we said, how are we going to trust the dictator that has been doing all these things, and he will count the votes, that he count the votes as the votes are? But we realized that we had no other way, and we said, let's move ahead in that direction, and let's create all the conditions to avoid any fraud.
Thousands of volunteers take to the countryside in a door-to-door campaign to convince Chileans that they can vote no without fear of reprisal, and that the results will not be rigged. They are greeted with suspicion and skepticism. To create the appearance of a fair vote, Pinochet and the generals write new election laws. Any opposition party that can collect 35,000 signatures will be allowed to have poll watchers, a critical factor to prevent vote fraud, and be given 15 minutes of television time every night for 4 weeks before the voting.
And I said, look, if you register, I'm going to be on TV. And the day that I'm going to be in TV, I will tell to Mr. Pinochet that he has to go.
Primero dijo usted, General Pinochet.
After his party is certified, Lagos gets his chance when he appears on the Chilean equivalent of Meet the Press.
Le voy a recordar, General Pinochet.
He holds up a newspaper clipping in which Pinochet is quoted saying he will not be a candidate in the plebiscite.
Y ahora le promete al país otros 8 años, con tortura, con asesinatos, con violación de derechos humanos. Me parece inadmisible que un chileno tenga tanta ambición de poder, de pretender estar 25 años en el poder.
His daring performance makes Ricardo Lagos a celebrity overnight. And his performance foreshadows the significance of television in the coming No campaign. Pinochet's vulnerability is human rights. The No campaign plans television spots to emphasize torture, death, and prison. But US political consultants advise them that dwelling on the fears of the past would be a turnoff.
They developed a campaign that was future-oriented, a campaign that focused on bread and butter issues, and it was a campaign that ultimately caught the Pinochet regime and the supporters of the yes vote by complete surprise when it was aired on the first night in that last 30 days of the campaign.
Porque nace el arco iris después de la tempestad, porque quiero que florezcan mil maneras de pensar, porque sin la dictadura la alegría va a llegar, porque pienso en el futuro, voy a decir que no.
That no, what was meaning yes to democracy was meaning yes to more social justice and not no to injustice.
La idea de que la alegría ya viene no era una invitación a un país de todos. La idea de que íbamos a derrotar la dictadura no con un fusil, sino con un lápiz. La idea de que este camino se iba a hacer sin odio, sin rencor, sin venganza.
On television, the No campaign is a sensation. Images of a bright future without Pinochet. The TV spots earn credibility with skeptical viewers, with compelling references to the suffering inflicted by the dictatorship.
People used to rush home to watch those spots. I used to rush home to watch those spots. It was like, 15 minutes where, they use real words to say real things, Torture is torture, and it happened here. And after all these years of denial, there it was for the first time on television. Poverty exists.
Buenos días, don Aníbal. Deme dos marraquetas.
Little old ladies don't even have enough money in their purses to buy a tea bag for their afternoon tea.
Voy a llevar té también.
¿Cómo no? ¿Dos bolsitas?
Una nomás.
No más miseria.
Información de este minuto para el diario de Cooperativa dice que a muy pocas horas de que se inicie el plebiscito en Chile, voto no. No. Voto sí. Sí. No.
Opposition poll watchers now perform a parallel vote count based on sampling techniques. By fax and telephone, the numbers are fed to computers in Santiago. By early evening, they project the No has won decisively. A small independent radio station announces the results. Ensconced in the presidential palace, Pinochet says nothing. Suspicions of electoral fraud grow as hours pass with no announcement of the vote tally. At midnight, Pinochet's Navy, Air Force and police commanders enter the palace. General Fernando Matei, Air Force commander, tells reporters. It appears the No has won. A public statement that warns Pinochet to accept the defeat. Within seconds, his remarks are on the radio.
The great strength was that it did really come from ordinary, extraordinary people. And they really